Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Wow, yesterday I shared with you a 411 from very close to my home. And a person who lives in my neck of the woods just north of me reached out. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him because he's got some info for me, and I'm pretty stoked about that. But today, my friends, I have some absolutely terrifying encounters for you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. I've not had the nerve to say anything about this for fear of whatever happens will follow me. But I'm 32 years old now, and I want to expose the truth. My mother and I, along with my older brother and my mom's then husband at the time, moved to Kentucky. My mom met a man who convinced her to sell her house in Cincinnati, her car, her houseboat, all bought and paid for. I was 6 years old at the time, back in 1994. It was summer, I believe, although the next few years are splotchy at best in my memory. Many strange occurrences happened even after we left Kentucky and moved to Pensacola with my aunt. But that's another story, although possibly related. They decided to build a house with the money from selling all of her belongings. It was only her husband and my brother, who had to have been just about 22 years old. We lived in this place with no electricity for a while or running water. The roof wasn't completed, so there was just a tarp to keep out the rain. I vividly remember the outhouse that was up a steep hill just about 30 yards from the house, as well as taking baths in a metal basin before school with water that needed to be heated over the fire. One day I was drawing a picture on the floor of my aunt's house with one of my cousins. It was simply a picture of scenery, little hills, and badly drawn trees. I began dotting the sky with stars when my cousin grabbed my pencil from me and said, "No, this is how you draw a star," as he carefully draws two intersecting triangles to form a hexagram, or what is more commonly known as the Star of David. I only vaguely remember the subsequent events. I remember exploring this very old barn from the 30s, falling apart and blackened with mold and weathering. The next few months I began to draw the star on pieces of notebook paper many times. I became, for a lack of better words, obsessed with it. I drew little star-shaped men with arms and legs and a face. I hid them under my bed, those countless sheets. It appeared that I didn't want anyone to know that I was drawing them. I was self-conscious about it for some reason. Anyways, I'm droning. There's just so much to cover here. Although I don't know if the star has any relation to my visitation or if I just imagined it all. Connecting the star to a traumatic event is entirely possible. Here are the events as they happened. There was a church that I vividly remember, but for the life of me cannot find anywhere on any map. It was a small, rickety shack of a church, but I remember going to Sunday school there. They had a sermon once where I saw snakes in a tank by the pulpit. That was the last time I went there. My family was over, putting above-ground pool in the front yard when I had to pee, so I made the trek up the hill to the outhouse. The size was standard, probably 8 to 9 feet tall, where I stopped dead in my tracks. I remember the fear was so tangible, I grew cold and couldn't move out of panic. A large, and I mean very large, black, what looked like a bear, but its fur was long and matted and stuck out here and there. It had its head inside the outhouse door, but its body, the The shape of it, at least, towered above the outhouse a good 5 to 6 feet. I didn't scream, but did run back down the hill to tell my mom and brother about it. Of course, they didn't believe me, but my brother went into the woods later that day to look for signs of black bears, but there was none. We had 2 Doberman pinchers, which we kept in a cage behind the house. Venus and Shuki. Now I remember both these dogs. While Shuki was mild and calm most of the time, Venus was younger and barked at every little thing, regardless of what it was. My brother, mom, and myself were sitting in the living room. It was raining, torrential downpour, and we were worried that the tarp would cave in. The dogs were barking like usual, but then suddenly stopped. We hear screaming, like that of a dying woman right outside the front door. This undoubtedly was a mountain lion. If you've ever heard one, do a quick YouTube search to understand how horrifying they sound. It began scratching furiously on the front door. We had electricity by this point, and all the lights were on. I've talked to a number of wildlife experts, and they pointed out that this behavior is very unusual, as they normally stay away from humans. My mom had a garden outside to the left of the house, near a very disgusting pig pen that I adorned. One very nice clear day, we were outside and it began to rain in perfect square in the garden. No discernible connection, just weird. The final thing is accumulation of all these events, and by far the most terrifying. My mom swears up and down that my bunk bed was haunted or holding negative energy. I don't believe this. One night I was lying down to sleep. I had my little action figures, or did I? I think I might have just been using my hands to pretend they were characters under the covers. I don't know if I fell asleep or if this happened right afterward, but I remember seeing a black figure that I imagined in my youthful mind to be wearing a cloak like the Grim Reaper, standing still in the middle of my room. But when I say black, I don't mean the color. I mean pure darkness, so much that I could see it clearly in the dead of night with only the moon to illuminate anything. It was like what I would imagine a black hole to look like. It said nothing and never moved. I was terrified and unable to move. I've toyed around with the idea of sleep paralysis, and I believe if I even told this to my therapist, she would agree. But regardless of the story's sake, I couldn't move at all. Suddenly the covers are ripped off of me, and I can see my still body lying in my pajamas. The next thing I remember was waking up, walking into the living room where my mom was sitting on the edge of the couch. She immediately ran to me and put her hands on my shoulders, as if she knew something had happened. I simply said to her, "It's okay, Mommy, I'm okay." We moved shortly after that, but even after moving to Florida, I still had things happening. I was first introduced to severe anxiety and depression, excessive eye blinking that comes and goes to this day. A few times my mom said that I would act like a banshee, flailing my arms and eyes rolling in the back of my head, speaking in some would call tongues, but that only happened twice, once at home and once in church. Sometimes I can hear whispers in my ears that are like thoughts, but more like indiscernible chattering that is somewhere between hearing and thinking. It's weird, but only happens rarely now. I have never to this day slept with covers completely over me. I, to this day, have never drawn a star, and will stay away from it, even if my life depends on it. And that is why I believe Palestine Road, Kentucky is a very evil place. Wow, really quick. Talking to a couple of people recently has kind of like opened my eyes a little bit wider to certain things. And I've always known that Dogman, Sasquatch, whatever, seems to be drawn to a negative area. More or less Dogman, of course. There's that instance with the subscriber who shared the encounter with his uncle. Now, for me, I'm thinking that this whole area where this guy lives, or person lives, is really evil. And I'm thinking that the 2 visits, I think what that person saw as a child was a Dogman, obviously, by the outhouse, and that's what was clawing at the door, trying to get in. But it's very interesting that this case, this encounter or experiences, talks about an encounter with a beast or a creature, and also a cloaked figure with magical, and I hate using that word, symbolisms. And the subscriber who shared the encounter believed that their area that they were in was a very evil place. Had an encounter with a Dogman a couple times, different times they were spotted, but also a cloaked figure. I don't know. I there's some really weird stuff that, you know, when I first started this channel, it was all pretty cut and dry. You know, I had my encounter, and I never put anything with it. I saw him, I saw what I saw, my friends saw what we saw, and that was it. I never imagined there'd be connections like there are. But the more I read and the more I learn, it's crazy how many connections there truly is. Now, I'll just move on and quit rambling, but just think about all the connections that there is. And it's unbelievable how many connections there are. Today's second encounter, August 19th, 2018. I was sleeping over at a cousin's house that night, who we'll refer to as Ed. When I realized I forgot my cell phone charger, we decided to walk to my house since it's only a 10-minute walk, about 11 at night, pitch black outside. The worst part about having to walk to my house is the fact that we had to cross the woods, so we get to my house safe. But on the way back, we start walking near the abandoned woodland, when we turn around and see 2 huge dogs walking towards us. We start to speed up, and that's when they start howling, and it's coming from the wooded land. That's when we really start running. I turn around, the dogs are gone, but I see a humanoid silhouette of something running from the woods. I drop everything I had in my hand so I could run faster, because at that point I could hear footsteps. We stopped getting chased when we were at the gates of my cousin's house, which is not really safe because his land is pretty big. That gave me the chills even once we were inside and all the dogs were howling. We get there and explain everything to my aunt, and she says, yeah, people have been seeing things in the area. So in September 1st, 2019, another sleepover at that cousin's house, but this time it's Ed and my 2 other cousins, who we refer to as J and A. We decide to camp on Ed's land since it's big. Everything's fine up until 3 a.m. and we decide to put out the bonfire and call it a night. A and I are sharing a tent, and Ed and J are sharing one as well. We settle in our tents. I was getting ready to sleep when I hear a loud scream. A whispers to me, "Did you hear that?" I say, "Yeah, what the hell was it?" We unzip our tents just as the other 2 unzip theirs. Ed says, "Did you guys hear that too?" We discuss what we heard and decide to go back into our tents and try to sleep, yet again we heard the same scream, yet it was getting closer. We scrammed inside Ed's house without a second thought. Today's third encounter. It was near the end of visiting my uncle's house in the border of Texas. My sister was sitting on the curb on the ground, probably chatting with her boyfriend on the phone. My brother sat casually on the truck bed of the truck. My dad was accompanied with my uncle and my mom and his wife. I wasn't that interested in joining them. In fact, I'd rather go on the merry-go-round that was in the back of his yard. It was a rusted, huge merry-go-round, but it was in well enough shape to do its job. Concealed slightly by trees and a nearby dog pen which contained Dobermans and their whining puppies. I remember going on this thing when I was like 11. I'm now 18. I hadn't been to this place in years. I walked towards it and slid my phone in the back of my pocket. I felt an eerie feeling as I was alone. I grabbed the metal bars and ran along the contraption. My shoes were digging into the red-tinted dirt and shrubs. When I was content with the speed, I finally jumped on. I sat on the edge, feeling the wind run over me and excitement. But as every turn is made, I felt anxious, like I was being watched. But I wasn't being watched. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear any people in the neighboring trailers, but that was earlier. It was just quiet because of the wind. Even the puppies, who I heard whimpering much earlier, were dead silent. I started hearing things. I then hopped off of the ride and made my way back to the garage door and looked at my family. I only stayed for 2 minutes before being drawn back. It was much darker now. The sky had a dark gray tint to it. I decided to play some music to ease myself, so I played a love song. It reminded me of a guy I liked, and it was a very happy tone. I started playing Cupid's Chokehold by Gym Class Heroes. I ignored the occasional crackling of the music, as the signal in the backyard was not great. As the song was brought to an end, I was aware of the silence. The music filled the silence, but not anymore. Not even the sound of a peacock was heard. I spun around more slowly and saw something. A grayish-white tall figure ducked behind some bushes. I felt my anxiety raise, like this confirmed why I had been feeling so fearful, and I was being watched. I watched, I heard a noise in the plants behind me, and finally a peacock in the distance started squawking. I didn't spend any longer in that spot. I shoved my phone in my pocket and sprinted, ignoring the sounds behind me and the peacock shrieking. I finally sat on the edge of the steps to the garage door, unable to see the merry-go-round from here. But I was able to see the Dobermans. I drew closer to them and I noticed they backed off fearful. But they liked me earlier. Even the mother Doberman. They jumped on the fence and licked my fingers earlier. But then the horrifying realization came. They weren't looking at me. It was behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. I backed off to sit on the steps watching the Dobermans. Then I started texting my friend the whole ordeal. He told me that it was nothing and just some animal, even joking it was the chupacabra. However, the guy I liked told me to be weary and get away from there. I glanced over at the dogs. The mother watched over me. I shouldn't have been heading back to the truck, but I felt something pulling me towards the merry-go-round. And I started walking closer. Now I was on a video call with my friend, one foot over the other, but I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to listen to my friend and show him the merry-go-round. The sound of my mother's voice broke me out of my trance, and I made my way back to my family. Today's fourth part of the upload. I was working late last night, and while I was taking the garbage out, I arrived at the dumpsters. I smelled a stench similar to wet dog and blood. I looked up and heard rustling in the brush. I saw a large black creature, about 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in fur. It appeared to be humanoid in shape, except with the head of a wolf or coyote. It had its back towards me and was walking toward the dark area in the forest. I immediately ran away. I'm not sure what I saw, but my coworkers told me, "Yeah, you probably saw a werewolf," jokingly. Today's fifth part of the upload. This happened about 18 years ago. Damn, I feel old. But I was living with my grandmother on the Navajo res. Her house was between two known unmarked cemeteries. Anyway, one night she was out at bingo and my cousin Matt was in charge of watching over me. I was in the back of the house watching TV when the dogs began to howl. Soon after, I heard a thud on the roof. Confused and freaked out, I jumped up and backed away from the window and listened. The dogs were going ballistic outside, howling, growling, and barking. That's when I had enough and started walking toward the front of the house, where the living room and Matt were located. Whatever was on the roof began to mirror my movement and was following me directly above. I bolted to the living room and yelled at Matt. He turned off the TV and we listened. Something was walking in circles on the roof and wanted us to know it was there. Matt, being traditional native, began to pray. After a few moments of torment, Matt instructed me to follow him outside onto the porch. At this point, Matt yelled at the thing to leave. Whatever it was ran back towards the house, jumped off and landed with a loud audible thud, and began running towards the neighbors' trailers. The neighbors' horses got uneasy and began to freak out in their stables. Meanwhile, the neighborhood dogs were in pursuit. They followed it east and down the trail out of earshot. Hands down, the most terrifying experience of my life. Today's final part of the upload. So a long time ago, me and my very close friend got bored and decided to discover the nearby woods. We lived in a secluded area where we had thick forest around us for miles, and frankly, the rural area was boring. We had no one from our age and no internet, so while we were sitting aimlessly, we decided to pack some stuff and wander into the woods. Now my friend is a huge guy, mainly because he's obsessed with bodybuilding, so it was a bit hard for someone to scare him, but as we walked in, we both had an eerie feeling like we were being watched. The mood was tense, and strangely, the woods were dead silent. No birds chirping, no wind, no sound of an animal or insect, not even a cricket. Approximately after 20 minutes of nothing but scaring ourselves, we heard a bark. In where I live, we have stray dogs, both in the streets and wooded areas, and the ones that are in the wooded areas are not as friendly as the ones that are in the streets, because they're mainly hungry. We stopped in our tracks and paid close attention to where the sound was coming from. It was coming from our left and sounded pretty close. However, as the bark kept on, we both realized there was something off about it. I don't know how to put it, but it was almost like someone was trying to impersonate a dog, doing a very good job of it, but not at the same time. Then we realized another odd thing about our supposed canine friend. The bark was repetitive, like it was being played on a speaker on repeat. My friend said that something is off, and he's genuinely creeped out, and I'm not gonna lie, I was shaking. You might say that it's quite natural to get creeped out in the woods, in the middle of the night, out in the middle of nowhere, but this was different. Every single fiber of our bodies wanted us to get the hell out of there, but we were too scared to move. Finally, I told my friend to run. Quite reluctantly, he obliged. We ran like our lives depended on it, and still felt the thing was chasing us. We were out of breath when we found our way back, and my buddy said he had heard branches breaking as we were hauling ass out of there. He was on the verge of crying hysterically out of pure fear. Strangest thing, however, is the fact that we both live in the country, which has nothing to do with America, let alone any Native American culture. What do you think was chasing us or stalking us back there? Wow, I told you they were pretty terrifying, and I'm a little bit uneasy right now. I started recording this at 12:30, it's about now 2, and my house is pitch black, my daughter's asleep, and every once in a while this happens when I get a little nerved narrating some of these encounters to you guys. Tonight was one of those nights, and I don't know why. I'd occasionally glance over my shoulder into the dark living room behind my studio, and yeah, anyway. Like I said, a guy reached out to me yesterday, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him. I don't know if he'll come on and share what he knows or what he's seen or what he's experienced, but I'm going to at least write it down if he doesn't and share it with you guys. I've got a really, really good feeling that what he's going to share with me is pretty messed up. Just by the way he was talking, and I'm quite familiar where he lives. Where he's located is literally I used to fish up there, and we caught some weird fish, and it's creepy up there at night too. So I'm looking to hear what he's got to say, and I don't know. I'm kind of looking forward to tomorrow's conversation. Anyway, have a great night, guys. Thanks for always tuning in. Thank you for always supporting the channel. And I wish you guys nothing but the best. Even the trolls out there. Good luck, guys. I hope you guys have a special and joyous day. This is for the trolls. But for everyone who really supports the channel, thank you so much. With that, I'm going to bid you farewell and see ya!